Hello guys, gals and non-binary pals, it is your Law and Saviour here, the Law by Night podcast guy, and before we get too deep into it, I just want to take a sec to send a huge thank you to the beautiful people over at Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. Aha! Gotcha! No, there is no sponsor for this video, technically speaking, but I do have something cool to talk about that I think you will like very much. As of the writing and recording of this script, my gorgeous friends at By Night Studios, the folks who provide you the various World of Darkness LARP books, will be releasing their latest Vampire the Masquerade sourcebook, War of Ages, in mid to late 2022. But what is War of Ages? Well, War of Ages is a Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition live-action setting book that includes a focus on collaborative live-action role-playing, otherwise known as LARP. It's set to provide inspiration, guidance, and tools for developing LARPs with a focus on setting and fiction in the V5 setting. This book will include sections that highlight Nordic styles of gaming and how to bring the LARP experiences to one's game both in person and online play, including suggestions and guidelines for storytellers and players alike. The focus will remain on the simple core experience of newly created vampires of the Camarilla and Anarchs as they dabble in the ideologies of vampiric society, learn to play politics, and ultimately become significant influencers within their respective sects. Players and storytellers will also learn how to use the Sabbat as an antagonistic force in LARP, the authority of the sect positions, and much, much more. Finally, and most relevant to this episode of the Law by Night podcast, War of Ages will provide information about the mysterious Ashira. This book is a valuable asset to anyone interested in elevating their role-playing experience within the modern World of Darkness universe. So, if anything I've just rambled on about rouses the blood or makes you feel under the influence of awe, head over to By Night Studios' website and buy yourself a copy of War of Ages. If you are listening to this on YouTube, I have provided a link to the website in the description below. If you are listening to this elsewhere, well, find the link where I said it would be, or search it for yourself. If you have any questions about the book, speak to By Night Studios, not me. And with that bit of friendly promotion out of the way, let us start the podcast proper. If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the masquerade. In this special episode, we shall discuss the Ashira, the Islamic sect of vampires. We shall discuss their origins, motives, and what sort of cultures these kindred live, as well as the mystery that is the keening. There are many things that keep me wide awake at day. Much of our world is a mystery to both kindred and kind alike, yet we are more focused on blasting lumps of metal into space and finding new ways to screw each other over on other planets. I ponder on the oddities that exist within our kind, such as the small coven of lianin in the woods surrounding our home that have somehow managed to survive the feisty Garou here, but all of that pales in comparison as I stand before you and ask, how in all that is holy can you look so abhorrent in a tailor-made suit, so many English pounds wasted on fine materials that just hang on you like a dirty dish rag? But there is very little one can do now. Elysium calls, and there is much to discuss. Indeed, child, this is no ordinary Elysium in which we must attend this evening. In fact, it is hardly an Elysium at all, as it was an invite-only event. Anyway, some representatives of the Ashira are paying Prince Alexandria and her court a visit. Whilst you technically were not invited, I think the Ashira would appreciate one as young as yourself to be open-minded enough to learn of their culture. That, and I'm kind of obliged to bring you along, given the whole tradition of accounting. Oh, you needn't worry about us talking about this in the open. I assure you we are quite safe. After all, the history of the Ashira goes hand in hand with Islam faith, and anyone who would pay the slightest bit of attention would assume nothing suspicious at all. To that end, I must point out that my knowledge on both them and Islam is not perfect, so I apologize now in advance for not having a fuller picture to present to you. There are also Islamic and Ashira specific terms that I've never been able to fully pronounce in all of my years on this godforsaken planet, and we both know how much we like to giggle at Malcolm's funny way of saying saying funny words. Ha 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 ha. Oh, I apologize if that is something that will offend you, but given you're not going to get an education from anywhere else, I would kindly suggest that you button it and keep such comments to yourself, child. So, let us start at the beginning, for old time's sake. If I wasn't clear enough, the Ashira are a sect consisting of Islamic vampires who declare their faith in Allah. They believe redemption for the Kindred was among the promises Muhammad made if they chose to follow Allah. Not all Islamic vampires are a member of the sect, and not all Ashira Kindred are Islamic. I know it was once the case that the vast majority of Kindred involved in the Ashira follow Islam because it was convenient for them or to make it easier to operate in the Middle East, finding other ways to stave off the beast, just like the Westerners would coast along the waves of Christianity. Many elder vampires of the time fell into this category. For the longest time, I found their choice of name rather interesting. Ashira to us is spelt with 2 R's and is said to be derived from the Arabic word Ashira containing 1 R, meaning clan. Ashira mean not the letter R, you fucking idiot. However, I believe this description given to me by a lesser Canaanite scholar is very much false. If memory serves, Ashira with this spelling is a girl's name of Hebrew origin meaning rich, I will sing. I am also aware of a goddess by the name of Ashira, spelt Asherah, who is a mother goddess in the ancient Semitic religion, a potential queen of heaven in the book of Jeremiah, written approximately 628 BC. But I digress. Like mortal Islam, the Ashira aspires to be a community bound together in a unified bow, but the reality is really a diverse enclave bound together by some common beliefs. The same, of course, can be said about our own society. Prince Alexandria holds a tight fort in Hemingworth, forever her hand round the throat of her denizens. The domain of Guildford, however, is far more lax. Of course, the blood of Cain does not discriminate. Politics and ambition poison the Ashira as it does the Camarilla Sabbat and even the Anarchs. The Ashira are no stranger to political squabbling and power plays, ruling over North Africa and Arabia, which, as of this conversation, includes Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Yemen, and portions of Jordan. At their height, they stretched across the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia, conflicting with Frankish Canaanites during the Crusades, fighting with the Mongol Canaanites, which of course we know are the Ander, during their invasion of Persia and Central Asia. If you have heard anything about them prior to our conversation, it is most likely hearing they control Afghanistan, Iran, Egypt, particularly in Cairo, as well as Jerusalem in Israel, which I believe their influence is the strongest, alongside Saudi Arabia, which I mentioned moments ago. It was with the blood-bound marriage between the Toreador luminary Victoria Ash and Banu Hakim Mafuzela Tegrius that brought together the Ashira and Camarilla as allies. Ah yes, the Vermilion Wedding, that infamous elaborate blood marriage. The concept was invented by the Toreadors of the Courts of Love in Paris to the surprise of fucking no one. It was really ever used as a big political power move that would only be ever approved by a prince of a city. Sometimes they were used out of love, but such occurrences were much, much rarer. They probably fell out of favour during the Victorian period but have started to make a comeback in recent years, much to my annoyance. In any case, Cairo and Jerusalem have seen a stronger Camarilla presence in recent years because of this alliance, but I'm told it is still very much under Ashira rule, but my sources are in conflict with each other unfortunately, which is not ideal. I know, but I am hardly going to make the commute to find out myself, especially with the constant babysitting. On that note, I suppose now would be an appropriate time to talk about how Canaanites embedded themselves with the Muslims, which means a fairly lengthy history lesson is required. Muhammad ibn Abdullah was an Arab religious, social and political leader and the founder of the world religion of Islam. You would probably know of him more as the final prophet of God in all the various branches of Islam, as stated by ancient Islamic doctrine. It was his job, or more appropriately, holy duty to provide the teachings of the prophets before him, such as Adam, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Muhammad was born approximately 570 CE in Mecca, son of Amina bint Wahab, his mother, and Abdullah ibn Abd Atimilab, the son of Quraysh tribal leader Abd al-Muttalib ibn Hashim. Apologies again for my mispronunciations. A few months before Muhammad's birth, Abdullah died, leaving Amina alone to look after their sickly, frail child. Barely able to feed herself, let alone Muhammad, she sent him away at the age of 2 to live with a foster family family in a nearby village of At-Taif in Mecca. This new family treated him with disdain, but at least the air was cleaner and had a chance at life as a shepherd, something he started working towards when he was 4 as his health began to improve. He was very contemplative and somewhat moody, staring into space, questioning everything, as if life, the mundane, supernatural stars and sky, was some intense riddle that needed to be solved. His strange behavior did not go down with his foster family, who believed he was possessed by a devil. As such, they sent him back to live with his mother Amina, who died when he was 6. He was raised under the care of his grandfather Abd al-Muttalib, whose home overlooked the Temple of Kaaba, a building at the center of Islam's most important mosque. Muhammad would spend the next 4 years learning all he could of the Kaaba and the sacred stone, which was believed to be a piece of the moon that had fallen to earth, sacred to the moon god Hubal. He was fascinated by religion and the concepts of salvation. When al-Muttalib died, Muhammad found himself in the care of an uncle by the name of Abu Talib, who believed children should earn their keep. Now 10 years old, he was a camel driver and caravan guard and travelled far and wide. He worked hard, but focused more on his own personal, spiritual, religious research, seeking scholars and holy men, debating all aspects of Christianity, Judaism, and paganism. When he turned 25, Muhammad fell in love with the wealthy widow Khadija at first sight. The feeling was mutual, and Muhammad asked for her hand in marriage. Despite being somewhat of a poor businessman, he had some completeness in his life. His wife, the surviving 2 of his 6 children, his sons Qasim and Abdullah, as well as making occasional debates with his wife's cousin, Waraka, on Judaic law. Despite all this, he still yearned for more, periodically secluding himself in a mountain cave named Hira for several nights of prayer. When he was 40 in 1610 CE, roughly, Muhammad reported being visited by Gabriel in the cave, the beginnings of what would later become the Quran. He would tell his wife Khadija what happened, who, alongside Waraka, convinced Muhammad this was indeed a sight from God and a great revelation, the first revelation as a matter of fact. Along with his sons, they were amongst the first of Muhammad's followers, and all encouraged him to return to the caves each night. It is said that Gabriel, or Jibril, as she is often referred to here, showed Muhammad the terrible fate that awaited those who did not repent in their ways and worship one God. Muhammad, according to Gabriel and the other angels, would be the last messenger to humanity. In 613, Muhammad started preaching these revelations publicly, proclaiming that God is one, that complete submission, Islam, to God is the right way of life. There is a lot more that follows, such as how the preachings of Muhammad made him a heretic that resulted in both him and his followers receiving death threats, his hiding in his uncle's castle, how some rabbis were convinced he was the Messiah, and growing interest for conquest. But at what point did vampires start poking their noses in? And more importantly, how? This was during a time when kindred was very rare in Arabia, partly because of the lack of influence and wealth to be exploited, but mainly because Mecca was a place of great holiness. No vampire could sit there without risking final death. Mecca was and still is a holy city, yes, but this brand of true faith is truly something spectacular. As Muhammad came to understand and embrace his role as the prophet, a wail audible only to Canaanites began to emanate from the city and the entire region. It would start at dawn, beginning as a distant wail and becoming a roar by noon. Yes, child, this was something only Canaanites would notice and did have their sleep patterns truly disturbed, robbing the sanity of the Canaanites through constant frenzying and physical and mental damage being inflicted to them. Obviously, the closer you got to Mecca, the louder and more potent this would all be. It was said that if you stood inside Mecca, you would be consumed by a white flame. It was also said that under the full effect of this phenomenon, the use of disciplines was significantly harder. This child is the keening, and any devout Islamic kindred endured it as a sign of the devotion to Allah, that they had a lot of work to do if they were to stand as true Muslims. That said, wards were placed round the stolen black stone of Kaaba in 950 CE that lessened some of the effects of the keening somewhat. Excuse me, neonate, it seems I got a little distracted there. Returning back to vampiric interference with the Prophet, it is said that in 622 CE, an Arabian La Sombre named Solomon ibn Abdullah met Muhammad in an attempt to control and manipulate such a powerful mortal. This fateful encounter did not go how the La Sombre anticipated. Hit by the power of Muhammad's message and his palpable faith, Solomon didn't just convert to Islam, but surrendered himself to the Prophet, seeing a path in redemption and a paradise in faith they had lost many years ago. He summoned his child child and ghouls, or Ansar, to use the Ashira term for them, released them from their bloodbounds and taught the ways of Islam. Most did not agree with this, but some did. Together, they took up the task of defending the faith and spreading it to fellow Canaanites. Within a few years, several other converts spread the faith across the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. By 632 CE, the core tenets of the sect had taken shape, and the Ashira established themselves as a major power in the Islamic world. It is never mentioned what led to the decline to the Ashira, but it is probably due to the Ashira's decreased usage of disciplines to deal with the mortals, believing that if they did, it would weaken and undermine the influence of the Prophet and his teachings. Now, you can't argue with that now, can you? A lot would happen after Muhammad's passing, which I will not explore in great detail for now. We have covered a lot already and still have so much more to explore, but if you allow me to give you the shorthand, the sect would spread into Asia with Muslim traders, establishing themselves on the Indian subcontinent and the Malay Archipelago, as far east as Mindanao, despite opposition from both local Canaanites of the Hindu faith and the Wong Kwei, the Kwei Jin. The Ashira even managed to establish sultans in Mumbai, Delhi and Lahore. As late as the 19th century, the Ashira was still vying for influence in Egypt, the Holy Land and the steadily declining Ottoman Empire. By the modern era, their influence is greatly reduced, and the Ashira have entered a truce and alliance with the Camarilla to preserve what power they have left, as I explained earlier on. What the Ashira have always managed to hold on to is their faith in Islam, which probably doesn't need saying again. What probably needs reminding is that some are more faithful than others. They follow the teachings of the Quran, particularly the following. A Muslim must maintain a sober and dignified appearance, neither given to wild outbursts of emotion or careless or lewd behavior. The manner of his clothes and ornamentation should be simple and modest, showing proper respect and humility as is a worthy child of God. He is enjoined to respond to his natural urges and appetites as Allah intended, but in moderation, never to excess. He must not kill, except in times of war or in defense of the faithful. He must be honest and forthright in his dealings with others, and once his oath is given, it must be kept no matter the cost. He must not steal or gamble. He must not have dealing with sorcerers. He must be charitable and compassionate to those in need, regardless of their faith. He must treat his servants with respect, never abusing them, for they are also children of God. And finally, he must never be complacent in his personal development, but strive to broaden his mind and enhance his knowledge of all things Allah has created. I bet you, child, you can count on one hand how many of those you've stuck to before and after you embrace. It's okay, child. You needn't feel bad. Most Ashira don't stick religiously to these either, to pardon the pun. Members of the Ashira, much like many of the mortal Muslims, stick to a number of social and spiritual duties known as the 5 pillars that sire, child and ghouls and other servants must uphold. Of course, it is the responsibility of the sire of the newly embraced to teach and correct the child as and when they see fit. Similar to the devote of the road of heaven, for which there are a lot of similarities, they present their own problems and workarounds. For example, the second pillar, Salat, the 5 daily prayers cannot be achieved by Canaanites, at least not fully. The ones in the noon and mid-afternoon are the prayers in question. This is compensated by the Ashira performing additional charity work as part of Zakat, almsgiving, the 3rd pillar. The 4th pillar, Psalm, fasting, is pretty self-explanatory, but it is the one the Ashira take the most pride in, demonstrating their mastery over the animal urges of the beast. The truly devoted enter torpor because of it, willingly, of course. On top of this, there is the topic of roads, or tariq, many followed during the Dark Ages and to an extent the modern night. They are similar but oh so very different to our own Western equivalents, and to break down the nuances of them now, en route to Elysium, would be most dangerous. If you are interested, we can go into greater detail some other night, but for now, let me just bastardize them for you. Tariq el-Hafam, the Road of Bones. Tariq el-Badawiyyan, the Road of Nomad, the Muslim version of the Road of the Beast. Tariq el-Harb, the Road of War, the Muslim version of the Road of Chivalry. Tariq el-Haya, the Road of the Serpent or Road of Typhoon. Tariq el-Sama, the Road of Heaven. Tariq el-Shatan, the Road of the Devil or the Road of Sin. Tariq el-Talaquad, the Road of Paradox. Tariq el-Umar, the Road of Community, the Muslim version of the Road of Humanity. And Tariq el-Hakim, the Road of Blood. On the topic of blood, the morals of partaking in the kiss have never truly been resolved. Some prefer a cleaner approach via a purification ritual. Those on the road of blood do not really care for this, whilst some deliberately elect not to feed as frequently and who the sort of individuals they feed upon. The embrace also shares the same amount of seriousness, given the juxtaposition that is the vampire existence and the value of life Islam dictates. No one can be embraced into the Ashira unwillingly, meaning that the child in question must be made aware of the perils that the embrace will have on their soul. On those rare occasions that the mortal should approach the Canaanite for the embrace, they must think on it for 3 days to ponder on it, the sire-to-be I mean. Should the embrace occur, the sire must teach them in the ways of Allah, as I touched upon earlier on, as well as how the elders enforce their will onto their vampiric kin. Sultans are the Ashira equivalent of prince, whose power can come from many sources, but it is usually from a place of diplomacy and applied force. This isn't an Ashira exclusive term, but a generic term regardless of faith. Imam are the spiritual leader of the Ashira community, whose roles can overlap with the Sultan, as the Imam becomes the spiritual heart of the community, upholding faith under the Ashira's mosque. The Ulama are the Ashira scholars, often spending hundreds of years debating the Prophet's teachings. They advise Imam on decisions and wield a lot of political power if they so choose. The most respected of Ulama are called Mullah. Qadi serve as judges and law keepers of the community, similar to our own sharers, but with more advisory roles when it comes to matters concerning law. As for the neonates wishing to establish themselves, one must survive and work for power, domain and respect, just like us Westerners. These vampires also hold their different names with cultures and outlooks that vary from the kindred of the Western world. There are some exceptions to this, as 3 European clans, collectively known as the Franni, have never been particularly popular or populous. You can probably guess which 3. Clan Von True always struggled against their fight against the Banu Hakim. They fought the Bruja of Africa and underestimated the followers of Set. When the Roman Empire fell, so did the Ventru, for a time that is. The Blue Bloods have never been one to waste their time with religion, with the exception of a distinct lineage called the El Hijazi, who claim to be descendants of native Arabian lineages. They have also adopted Islam and are accepted as part of the Ashira, but they are so relatively few in number. Like their European cousins, they wield considerable political, financial and even religious power in the Arabian Peninsula and rule over several Saudi Arabia cities. Clan Tremere have never been liked by anyone and yet were able to set up a strong foothold in Jerusalem, forever on their hunt to take down the Salubri. Rumours speculate that their chantries in Egypt were set up with the Setites. Finally, there is Clan Zamitsi who, to be quite frank, never really cared. They are happy with their lands they rule in their own domains and don't need to get involved with the Ashira. Oh, I almost forgot. The Liabon are plentiful in Ashira territory but are not liked by them, which leaves us with the other clans, or Bayat, and a bloodline to unpack. The easiest for you to understand is the Banu Hakim, or the Assamites, the sons of Hakim. We have talked about them in great detail already, so I will save you the chore of repeating myself, but remember this. Whereas we openly switch between Banu Hakim and Assamites quite freely tonight, the Banu Hakim was originally a name exclusive to the Assamites of the Ashira, who, alongside the La Sombra, Nosferatu and Bruja, are some of the most common clans in the Ashira. The Al-Amin, the virtuous ones, is assigned to the Salubri. These Salubri are the ones that were tasked in the destruction of the Bali from North Africa to Asia, usually disguising themselves as members of other clans as they obsess over the destruction of the Bali, who still exhaust annoyance for the Salubri. With the Diablerie of Salot, the Banu Hakim allied themselves with the Salubri to protect and smuggle them away from the Tremere. This alliance runs deep in the ageless attitude towards the Salubri, who are protected by them. The 7 that is said to represent the clan are treated like royalty. Like their Western counterparts, they exist as 2 main castes, warrior and healer. The Bayat Mujrim, the Felon House, make up the Ravno, who are also similar to the Salubri and Banu Hakim in terms of recognizable attitude from a Westerner's perspective. They were treated with disdain for a propensity of a particular type of sin. You know they hailed from India, but you may have forgotten about their religious castes. The Roma Ravnos were the most recent to join the Ashira, not liking the presence of other Canaanites, as they went about about protecting their own people. The Alexandrites are the most well established in Islam, whilst it's the Bashir that are the most ancient of Muslim within the Ashira, but are not Muslim but are still people of the book, so to speak. The Bayat Majun, the Crazy House, have a very different idea of their Malkavian origin story. They say that Malkav, or Murid as he is often referred to here, sought to understand the secrets of the Djinn, which you probably know as genies. Standing on the same alleged rock where Abraham attempted to sacrifice Isaac, Murid made a deal with a powerful Djinn. The Djinn would see the mortal world and Murid the spiritual world. The fusing of the two drove both insane, according to this idea, with a bit of this madness passing down to the future child of Murid. Despite this somewhat ludicrous tale, the Majnun are respected by other clans for the sacrifice they made for insight and power, leaning into the role of seers and oracles that they, the Malkavians, were shunned for in the West. When Islam began, some Majnun rejected this origin story. The divine insight they possessed was those of the prophets, which would cause some controversy. Such Majnun argued that Muhammad was the last living prophet, if you see what I mean. The Bayat Mushakis, the aggressive house, consists of Bruja wanting to use the Islam faith as some sort of experiment to learn from their mistakes and reconstruct their own Carthage. Of course, this obviously hasn't happened yet, but one must applaud their stupid dreams. Bravo, Bruja, bravo! Now, if I wasn't clear enough, they are not wholly Muslim. Their infamous frenzies are said not to come from sheer rage, but frustration, stemmed from their passion for intellectual and martial pursuits. As for the Nosferatu of the Ashira, the Bayat Mustasharid, the Vagrant House, are very different when compared to most attitudes of younger Nosferatu in the West. The Mustasharid do not shy away from their new monstrous visage, but display their appearance quite proudly, obsessed with survival and the hunt. They know they are monsters, but are not evil, acting on a different set of moral standards to humans. Others are proud of their looks for totally different reasons. Many Nosferatu converted to Islam, however, becoming pillars of the Ashira sect as a whole. They fully embrace the belief that submission to Allah offers a path to redemption, even for the most horrific looking of Canaanites. These hopeful Nosferatu are known as the Hajj. The other main figureheads in the Ashira are the Qabalit al-Kayal, Clan La Sombra, the Clan of Shadows. The vast majority of the La Sombra within the Ashira are Christian, but a large minority are Muslim, and that minority is the most dedicated to the Ashira cause and have the largest presence throughout the sect. Naturally, there is great conflict within the sect because of the dueling ideologies. It is so intense that it can still be felt within the Friends of the Night, or the Amnesty Noctis in Europe, or the Askodallah al-Lahil in Islamic parts of the world. Very few members of the Qabalit Amwat, the Clan of Death, are true Muslims, using it more as a way of getting information. The Cappadocians in the Middle East seek the answers to death, decay, and what happens in between, much like the grave diggers all across the world. The respect that Muslim culture shows for the dead is a great boon and real problem for the Qabalit Amwat, so they still must exercise their studies with caution. This was particularly important during the Dark Ages, for if anyone knew of the Cappadocians' plans to diabolize God, they may not have been such a bloodline in the Middle East today. The Toreador of the Ashira, the Ra'en el-Fen, are very much the same as Toreadors elsewhere, their Ashira title roughly translating to the Shepherds of the Arts. Obsessed also with religious studies, they have been known to work with the Cappadocians in translating ancient texts and adorning their homes with far too many pretty things. On the other hand, the Washin, the Gangrel, or Beastmen, don't really care for Islam at all. They wander the desert wastes as they have done for countless centuries, emulating nomadic tribe behavior, attacking anyone who tries to bolster the dominance of civilization. They are descended from a single vampire, the 5th generation Methuselah Zayat, one of Solomon's and Tariq al-Hajj's closest allies. Tariq is the founder of the Ashira Nosferatu, the Bayat Mustasharid. The Washin saw themselves as heirs and protectors to the nomadic Bedouin tribes of North Africa and Arabia, but not all think like this though, especially in the modern nights. There are some that actually took up Islam and thrived in society, and they are the Taifa, becoming warrior scholars much like their offshoot's founder, Shapako of Clan Gangrel. In a way, the differences between the Taifa and Washin are not too dissimilar to the country and city Gangrel, only with the Ashira variant they are far more volatile. Finally, you have the Walid Set, the followers or children of Set, and are not any different from their Western variants. All they are is the Arabian branch of the Setite clan, so to speak. There is no deviation in faith or blood. They still worship the vampire god Set, and are frequently at odds with the Ashira, particularly the Assamite viziers. Right. That should be enough to keep you in the loop for now, Neonate. It is a lot, I know, but believe me, I have been doing my absolute best to give you the shorthand. A shame, really, as I could easily waffle more at you. It is all exotically rich. Light and dark battles with the Canaanite within the Ashira, pushing them to submit to God and become what they believe good Muslims should be, constantly wrestling with their beasts. I needn't remind you the dangers of treating our esteemed guests poorly, making a mockery of their name and faith, so listen to what they have to say and be polite. Go forth, my child, and socialize. Bring a bit of culture into your life. And please, do not bring about a war of ages in this city. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.